I invite you to take your Bibles, please, and turn to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, right after Proverbs. We're dealing with wisdom literature, and we're taking a little move from the prophets and the stories that we've been looking at in the times of the kings and the prophets, especially with Jeremiah at the end of the reign of the kings, that Zedekiah and went into captivity for 70 years. So we're coming back to a book that is attributed to Solomon. I think it's a very interesting book. It is the modernity of the Bible, I think, shows itself in this book. I think it's sometimes misunderstood as being a very negative view of life, when it really is a godly view of life, and it's very positive from that standpoint. And we will emphasize that as we go. But this evening we deal with an introductory lesson. If you've already picked up an Ecclesiastes lesson, there's a copy now in the foyer that has been corrected. And one of the problems is that I thought it had 22 chapters, apparently. So it doesn't. I don't want to scare you. I guess we've been in the prophets too long, but I put a 2 instead of a 1. It's just 12 chapters. If you want a clean copy, that's one to get. It'll be cleaned up on the website as well. So we want to begin with the things that we're looking at about the Hebrew word. We have this word Ecclesiastes, and we see the Hebrew words, not that, but here we see the Septuagint and our particular language, our particular translations bring this about. So we talk about the title and authorship of the book. Koheleth is the Hebrew term. And what does it literally mean? Those of you who have your lessons there for you. It's a speaker in an assembly. I speak in the assembly. We've had men this last week that preached in the meeting, in the assembly, and therefore we see the preacher. We see someone preaching, proclaiming a certain message that it is set forth. So it is translated preacher in verse 1 and verse 1, chapter 1 and verse 1, the words of the preacher. And how do they identify him? He's the son of David. He is the king of Jerusalem. And so when I see that, I say, well, did he write a lot of wise proverbs? Solomon did. And he's known for his wisdom, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But he could be presenting this idea of wisdom. And we're going to be looking at someone who experienced all facets of life as he makes his conclusion at the end of how we ought to put God into our lives and how that rectifies all the little problems that we go through in this book of wisdom. And it's just a great book from that standpoint. But the Ecclesiastes word is taken from the Greek version of the Old Testament, and it's the same thing as the preacher. Koheleth, Hebrew, Ecclesiastes, and the Greek translation of the Hebrew term, and in our language, it's the preacher. And you see him proclaiming the wise way to go. But he's been one who has experienced all the facets of his life. And we're going to see he experienced wealth. Did Solomon do that? He built gardens. It's a possibility that happened. All the things that are about him is indeed set forth before us. So he's proclaiming a wise way to live, wisdom literature. And yet people say, well, he's just vanity. Therefore it's just discouraging. It's not. It's a godly view of things, and it will set a young person on their way to having a proper relationship with God and a relationship in life. Because we're going to see some things that people need to understand. I've had family members, they wanted to have all the doctorate degrees they could have, want to teach in universities, and they've succeeded. But what happens when they die? What happens when things change? That's been their whole focus, and they didn't put God in there. We put money in there instead of God. That's going to be the answer. And Solomon takes those things apart, one at a time, to show, well, it has its limitations. And then you begin to say, well, what is the focus of your life? If it ends in failure like that, what's the conclusion? That's what we'll be looking at. Part B, King Solomon is indicated as the author. And so we see in these first two verses that he's the preacher, identified as the son of David and king of Jerusalem. And so could that fit with a literal man named Solomon in the Bible? I just give an example here in 2 Samuel, the 12th chapter, and verse 24. David comforted Bathsheba his wife, and went unto her and lay with her, and she bare a son, and called his name Solomon. And Jehovah loved him, and he sent by the hand of Nathan the prophet. He called his name Jedediah for Jehovah's sake. Well, who was David's son? Solomon, son of David. And we know that in the Kings he'll be ruling. So look at 1 Kings 4 and verse 1, where we observe, well, would this same one be a king? King Solomon was king over Israel. These were his princes, so he was king over Israel. Chapter 8 and verse 1, when we read that in our introductory lesson, we begin to see that, of course, he's going to build the temple. Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of tribes, the princes of the fathers' houses of children of Israel. And the King Solomon, where was he? He's in Jerusalem to bring up the ark of the covenant of Jehovah out of the city of David, which is in Zion, which would be lower and come up to where the temple was going to be, and so forth. So the Bible, if we look at the Bible itself, this could be literally Solomon. And but there are some people that have said that could not be. But did he have wisdom? Did he have that type of wisdom where he could be one who could really deal with wisdom? Chapter 1 and verse 16, which we're just kind of looking over all view of the book. I commune with my own heart, saying, Lo, I have gotten me great wisdom above all that was before me. Oh, Mr. Solomon, you're just hyperbole. You're just a little over the board on that one, aren't you? Bragging about yourself like that? He's writing by inspiration. He has great wisdom above all that was before me in Jerusalem. And yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. Well, would this be fitting with Solomon that we know about in the Bible? And our minds keep coming, well, I think he was kind of known for his wisdom. In 1 Kings 3, verse 10 and 12, God will say, yeah, he is. He's pleased with him. And the events that as he began to reign and think about reigning over these people, very humble. A lot of humility in Solomon at the beginning of his reign. It changes in the latter part of his reign there. But look at 1 Kings 3 with me, verse 10. See if this doesn't bring back memories of what you studied before about Solomon. It says, a speech pleased the Lord that Solomon asked this thing. Well, what had he asked? Let's go back to verse 7. And now, O Jehovah, my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David, my father. And I am but what? I am just a little child. What does he mean by that? He's just 12 years old? No, not necessarily. He said, I know not how to go out or come in. That's what he means by a child. He needs the wisdom. And I said, thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people, numerous people to govern and rule, that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give thy servant, therefore, an understanding heart to do what? To judge thy people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to judge this thy great people? And that's a man of humility, and he's needing help from God to govern as king in Jerusalem. And why did it please God? What does he say in verse 10 about pleasing God? It pleased God because he didn't ask for what? He didn't ask for riches, did he? He didn't ask for a long life. He didn't say, I'm getting evil with my enemies. It's time to it's time for them to get a dose of what? No. And so, comparatively speaking, he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. But did he have great wealth? Yes. And he's going to be blessed with wisdom, but we'll come in that, I'll give you great wealth, but you didn't ask for that. You asked for something to judge my people. That pleased God. And we have just a little sample of his wisdom on an earthly basis. We think, that was clever, but there's human nature. He brings in human nature at a particular important time. It's dealing with people that you might not like to be associated with. 2 harlots. Let's show your wisdom to something. No, this is very earthly. Where they were having birth control was not something they had in those days for harlots. They would have babies. And 2 harlots, they had their babies, and we know that they both died. One died. And the woman, who was it that took the live baby and traded the dead baby? And the other woman said, no, that's my baby. So we got a problem. And how would you mothers, will you fight to the end if you know that's your baby? It's very emotional. It's right down to where people live. And here is this part that's really, these are not godly people, it's people. And he's judging between them. So what kind of judgment does he offer? He says, bring me a sword. And what does he say he's going to do? I'll divide the baby, give half of it to you. Well, that's silly, isn't it? That's not very wise. And yet, what did it expose? Yeah, and expose the one that's not real. She didn't care if they killed a baby. But the mother does, doesn't she? And she always will. I think the real, true mother will do that. And that's how Solomon found that out. I think that's very wise. It's clever. It's understanding how things work together and not, here's an army and here's an army, how are we going to defeat them? Here are 2 women. And the most emotional part of their lives of having babies. And what they're going to deal with, one's dead and one's alive. And the switches happen. It's just a little sampling of wisdom. And I'm saying, if I've got a teenage child, if I've got a young child, I want them to be exposed to Ecclesiastes. Because they're going to grow of age. And they're going to have to, what's going to be my career path? What's going to be how I should live my life? And you got the final thing, the whole thing, fear God. And do what? Keep his commandments. Because that's what it's all about. That's the whole of man. And it's just an interesting story. It's going through every little part of how one could choose their life. And it just about covers it all. And shows why life can be vain. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Yes?
There's one verse that I think really brings home how wise Solomon was. 1 Kings 4:29.
Yep.
Now God gave Solomon wisdom and very great discernment and depth of mind like the sand that is on the seashore.
That's right.
That's quite a metaphor for how wise he was.
I agree with that. Verse 7 of chapter 10 is what I put. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came. This is the Queen of Sheba. And my eyes had seen it, and behold, half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceeds the fame which I had heard. So here's a queen, with all the riches that she would have, and it exceeds, his wisdom and his wealth exceeds more than I would have. And that's a great one about the sands of the seashore. It's immense. Well, I think it's worth saying, right, I believe it's Solomon. And we may find something a little later, and we will, that would say that just doesn't fit him as he was king in Jerusalem. And we'll talk more about that. number 4 there, I was great, and it was great, increased more and all before me in Jerusalem, is his great point that he makes. And I don't think that's a hyperbole. I think that's exactly what we're dealing with here. Did he set in order many proverbs? Is that something that would fit with Solomon as well? We kind of mentioned that, but you'll look at chapter 1 Kings 4:32. We can look at a lot of. We'll just kind of hit on some of this. He spake how many proverbs? He spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. That's prolific. It's just, he has of songs and then just the proverbs. Those little the symmetry between a proverb, antithetical, simile, all of those things that bring forth the wisdom in a general way. He wrote those things, and we see in Proverbs the first chapter in verse 1, as the book itself is being introduced, we see that Solomon indeed would be involved in this. The Proverbs of Solomon, who is he? The son of David, the king of Jerusalem, or Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the words of understanding. He would be the one that's been blessed by God, and what he writes down would indeed be inspired by God, but he possessed that. So this indication, at least at this point, said you're going to have to really show a way it could not fit with him. When we think about this, they just used the name Solomon because he was wise, but it was some other writer that did this, and that's a possibility. You could use one. I'm going to speak about wisdom, about life, about riches, but I'm going to use Solomon's name because it just fits so well. But they say, well, it can't be him, and I don't have a problem being him all the way through this book, and we'll discuss that as we go. When was it written? I would say because of the way he looks at life in his latter days. What did the wives, the many wives that he had from other countries, what did they do to Solomon? They led him away from God, didn't they? So the close of his life, he was presenting these things that will be something that doesn't fit with him beginning with God. But I think it very well could be realizing here that wasn't the way to live life for God, and he realized this is how you ought to live life for God. But that's why some people say that that time frame, he could not possibly have written it at all, because the end of his life was it's not really godly. But a lot of times we've studied the Song of Solomon, and last time we went through that, while we have that book there, that's talking about love between a man and a woman. It's not talking about the church, and it's literally, I think, talking about marital love, and we talked about those things. And you could not have that woman. She was involved in wanting to be married to a shepherd boy. Love you cannot buy. Love you cannot force. That's an indictment. That can be an indictment, I believe it is, as Solomon writes this, as an indictment against him because he had his many women and his concubines, and he couldn't have her. He couldn't have her heart. And we should be studying that on Valentine's Day, shouldn't we? But we've already done it. But there's Solomon's life, and this very well could be, if he's turning away from God, that indeed it would be another type of indictment of how to live life, and by inspiration, he's saying, all these things I've had, and fear God, keep his commandments, and that's the whole of man. And then his life passes on. Any thoughts about Solomon? Any questions about it? Couldn't be him. It fits him. You can't ignore that. So what is the theme of the book? 33 times, approximately, 33 times, you'll find the word vanity used in this book. And we just go over it and over. It just rings in your ears. And we want to get a hold of what that word means. In chapter 1 and verse 2, vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Can you understand why some people say, this is a depressed preacher? He's depressed about life, and therefore it sets you on a roll that is, indeed, this whole thing's about how to look at life, but it's depressing. Well, you have a point there. He does not vanity, it's vanity of vanities, as we see here. Chapter 11 and verse 10. Therefore remove sorrow from the heart and put away evil from thy flesh, for youth and dawn of life are vanity. So the beginning of life and youth is just depressing? Or if you just say, well, I'm not going to go there yet, we'll be going there later on, but vanity means what? Am I necessarily depressed and it's just nothing there? Or what is it? It's that way throughout the whole book too, David. It flees. You get that in your head, and so what does he say? You enjoy your youth. Don't be depressed by it. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Cheer thee in the days of thy youth. If I'm thinking this is a depressed look at life, when I get here, I said, if I'm going to be fair with this thing, I need to understand, and you come back to the Hebrew term, it means something transitory and therefore not satisfying. Name we one pleasure, earthly, physical pleasure you have that lasts. It just continues. I know a man that when he was young, he joined a circus. He ran away from home. Pleasure was going to be his from then on. It didn't work that way. And I have never had any food tasted like that before in my life. Did that last very long? Maybe till breakfast. The sexual relationship, all those things, they have to be renewed. and they have to be fulfilled again and again and again and again. That's the way pleasures are. They're for a season. And when he speaks about the earth, and so what looks like it just continues to come on, monotonous in this first chapter about the weather patterns. And therefore, you can see that depression just keeps on and on. It's the same thing. There's nothing different. But everything is transitory. Is our life transitory? We start as a young person. We end, if we live long enough, as an old person. And so you got your memories. Life is, you better have some memories. And how do you have your memories? You take care of every little day and fill it with good things. And because one day you won't be able to do those things. And you may not be capable of remembering those things. But that's part of life. I'll never forget a little book I read one time about a doctor. It was a thin book, and that's why I read it one day in the library. And it was about a doctor and the precious present. It's been I think it's so wise. The precious present. I give myself the precious present. And he kind of comes to a little, he's in his older age, and he's seeing a young man sweat by his brow, mowing a yard, and he smells the green grass of the spring, and he's just smiling there, and the boy, this work, he had to go out there and mow. He said, how come you are smiling so much? He said, well, I've learned to give myself the precious present. He said, I want one of those. I want to do that. And what the precious present was the moment. He couldn't work like that anymore. He could admire the strength of a young man. He loves the smell of freshly mowed grass. He likes that point. And just to observe that was a present tense. And those are the presents you get. You give every day a present to yourself. And what happens is that at the end of your life, you have a lot of memories that's worth reflecting upon. Rocking on the rocking chair, you can't do anything else, but you have those. Wonder if you didn't fill your life with that. Said, we're going to go on a trip one day, honey. We're going to take that trip, and it's going to be good. And you never get around to it because you're working, making money. What does Ecclesiastes say? That's fleeting. And then what do you have then? And that's just a way to live life. And it makes you put everything you have into that moment, and you don't know what's going to come from that. Sometimes it comes a lot of things that are wonderful. And I think God, in His providence, brings about a lot of those things. I've just been in the hospital with my dad. One of the people that came there to help him walk in the hallway when he could, he was a Filipino man. And of course, Dad, he sees me and says, "You remind me of somebody." Well, a lot of Filipinos remind Dad of somebody. But he thought that. And I thought that day that man was a very rude man. He just acted like he was doing his job, and he quit doing it because Dad wasn't cooperating too well. So the next day he came and got to know him. Well, he found out we're preachers, and he had been in the Philippines. He grew up in the Philippines, and his mother was converted by Lordy. We helped support him. And he's trying to find a church nearby. He lives over here in Village Grove, trying to find a church to go by because his mother said, "I want to go to a certain church." He said, "I didn't know you." Jim McDonald, he'd heard him preach when he was a boy from Lufkin. So you had that connection. I said, "I'm sure you were the church that your mother liked to go to, because I know those men." And he seen his eyes brightened up. Well, it just so happened we meet together and have some moment that we have that is kind of special. And I hope one day, she doesn't want to come to America right now, but sometimes he's trying to get her to go. He'll have a place to take her to worship. And opinions change about people. He changed his attitude about us. And my heart was changed about him. So those are moments, and you learn from that. Life is full of that. So I just think, what is we'll see in Ecclesiastes, you live with the wife that God has given you of their youth all the days of your life with joy, because it's vanity. It's fleeting. And you anoint your head with oil. You receive your bread because you planted the seed, and God has given you the bread. He's given you the wine, the juice, the grape. You live your life with the woman you love in joy. You rejoice in the wife of thy youth all the days of your life. And so that's not a negative way of looking at life, but you fill your life with a precious present. It's all I was thinking about every day with your Valentine, or your wife, your husband, and so forth. That fills your life with good things. Any comments upon that? It's because it's fleeting. It's empty. It's vain. It's something I don't put my hope on that, but I got to live through that and make sure I make the right decisions. And we'll look in this first lesson. We won't do that here, but we'll look at the weather patterns. I remember D. Bowman. He could write on the board. I remember in Lubbock, Texas, and he would preach a sermon a lot about just the vanity and the monotony of the weather and patterns, and made you remember that. And that was something that gets old, but it happens. Goes from the west, goes to the east, and what's life? It just keeps going like that. But it's transitory, and our life is transitory as well. And why couldn't a young person learn that early? That teenager who's going to be thinking about what I'm going to do with my life. That's a good book. It's the modernity of it is powerful on the mind of young people, I think. Just interesting. Do you look at the book of Ecclesiastes as a pessimistic view of life? Have you hope we studied together enough years to know. I don't believe that. There's some difficult times of life, and there's some things in here that, yeah, it is empty. I don't want to go that route, but it said, and what it is, don't put those things in the place of God. That's the point. And we make money, or make pleasure, we make sex, we make whatever out there, we make that our God. And that's the point we'll be avoiding.
I think it's a positive chapter. Number one, sure, is that through wisdom, it showed the perception of the end result of these things. Will there be too much wisdom, and what will happen? That perception is what helps us to know that it's reality.
That's right. It's reality. And when we're young, we don't really know that reality yet. We learn it, and then we can't go back to our youth, can we? So enjoy. That's why enjoy your youth, and that's a kind of positive thing to do. Solomon explored every avenue of earthly life. He didn't have his head in the heavens like people say. Well, you live a godly life. You're just putting your head in the heavens and thinking about heaven. Well, God's in heaven, but he's dealing with earthly life. This is where you and I live. It's not, well, you just want to think about heaven. You don't deal with real life situations. Attach your seatbelt. You're in for a ride when you realize he's going through every facet of your life. He's going to tell you why you shouldn't put your hope in that, because it's going to be it's vanity and striving after wind. And we'll talk more about what that means. I'm striving after what? Can you grab wind? Kind of hard to do that, isn't it? It's vanity. It's empty. You can't do that. And if you're just striving after the wind, that's not going to be of substance to you. Fear God, keep his commandments, and you will then put your life in a good order. The purpose of life is to show all earthly pursuits as the chief aim in life will not bring happiness, because they will not last. They will change. They will end. A lot of them will. And we will we'll look at some of those. For example, I want to be the wisest man in the world. So I'm going to study, and I'm going to apply myself to my books, and I'm going to learn a lot of things about a lot of things. And I pursue that. And I've got an uncle that he's done that. I mean, he has lived his life, and at one time he's a Christian. He's not anymore, and he's made his choice. And I think about him a lot because Ecclesiastes tells us that we have a day we're gonna. There's an eye opener. It'll be too late. But Ecclesiastes 2:15 and 16. Here is wisdom and madness in verse 12, and folly, for what can man do that cometh after the king, so forth. Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. All right, what is wisdom? Is it pretty good? Yeah. Would you rather be in the light tonight or in the dark? We got light. We like that. It exceeds that. The wise man's eyes are in his head, and the fool walketh in the darkness, and perceive that one event happeneth to them all. And yet I perceive one event happen to all. So I'd rather be wise than foolish, okay? So you learn things about how things work, you'll be a wise person. And you won't make a lot of mistakes, and you won't be foolish because you just be ignorant. But I perceive one event happeneth to them all. Without looking down, what would you think that one event be? Epidemic? The idea of losing your job? What is it? Death. We're all going to die. Well, that's depressing. No, it's reality. And we've got to look at it in a way, how I want to live wise. So listen to him. Then I said in my heart, as it happened to the fool, it'll happen to the wise man too. And the question, why was I more wise? I tell you, I don't want to live like a fool. Good. But you don't make wisdom your God. Why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, This also is what? Vanity. To make wisdom my chief goal. I'm going after that. It has its pluses. It's better than this, foolishness, but it still is. I'm just going to pursue that and leave everything else alone. I'm going to be wise. I'm going to be sharp and understanding how things work. Good. For the wise man, even as the fool, there's no remembrance forever, seeing that in the days to come all have been long forgotten. That's something. You're all your wisdom, and nobody will remember you, mostly. You know, a generation comes, a generation goes. How many in our audience tonight remembers 9/11? Those of us who went through it, we know what 9/11 is. But a new generation comes along, they'd have to be reminded of those things. And there's a lot of events that happen that I remember this and remember that, and it just goes by. And so we will be forgotten. And you think about, you live long enough to outlive your peers. People that live a long life, they do that. All their peers that they did things with. And when they were young, like we have young people and young couples, you did things together. I remember the young couples we did things together with. You go through life and you had this, how come I go to church that I grew up in and I don't know anybody there? It changes. And they don't remember me. I was baptized here. My dad preached here. They don't know him. And it's an eye-opener. And yet you have your memories how wonderful it was. And by the way, I think it's better than it is today. It's just, I can have my feelings too. I'd rather be at the church we had then and what it's become now. I can have my views of that. But they don't know you. And you say, well, everybody knew us. They're dying out. And so you say, well, that's horrible way to live. No. Does God forget the good things you did for people that have gone from this life? No. And sometimes a generation or two remember what you did for their great-grandfather. You know, they remember those things. But God does. That's why we do those things. And we serve. David served his generation. Just serve your generation. And let that be your focus. Have those present memories and don't. Well, they don't know me, and nobody calls on me, nobody sees me. And all my friends, well, it may be because you can't hear them, you can't see them, you can't converse. They have trouble conversing. You know, all those things can happen. And he says, there's no remembrance forever, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How doth the wise man die even as the fool? So what did I do? Here's your negativity slant of the book. I hated life. He's just depressed. No, I hated life because the work that is wrought under the sun was grievous unto me, for all his vanity and his striving after wind. Because I made that my pursuit. And so therefore you will hate life. So it won't bring you happiness. It doesn't. There'll be somebody be smarter than you. There'll be something you do not know. And but you will die like a fool. And his point, you'll be forgotten. We don't remember too many people from other generations. The same thing is about in chapter 2:26. He comes up, here's what you do for life. For to the man that pleaseth him, God giveth wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he giveth travail to gather and to heap up, that he may give it to him that pleaseth God. This is also vanity and a striving after wind. And we'll see in this context that you accumulated all of this money, you accumulated your wealth, and what happens when you die? It goes to somebody else, doesn't it? And they may be foolish, they may waste it, and what good was it to have all that money? Now, one of the things I think we'll see in chapter 5, and I have to be careful because if you want to apply the scriptures, it kind of goes a different way for you husbands that were trying to save money. You're not to hoard your money in Ecclesiastes. What are you supposed to do with it? Spend it. See, I don't want to get a hold of that one. But you'll see You spend it. You use money what it was for. But what do men do? I like to hoard it. I like to see how much going up, and all of a sudden one day, that's all you're going to get out of life. You're going to leave that behind. But who gets it? Somebody else to use it as he wants. So see what I'm talking about. Look at Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 10. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver. We like that. Or he that loveth abundance with increase, this also is vanity. So you just go after money and money and money. It's not going to help you. Thank you. What's it? When goods increase, they're increased to the one, to them, and it's not to them. And the advantage is therefore to the owner of, save the beholding of them with his eyes. I'm just looking at the heap of my treasures. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the fullness of the rich man suffereth him to sleep. This is a grievous evil which I've seen in the sun. Riches kept by the owner thereof to his hurt. Those riches perish by evil adventure. If he hath begotten a son, there's nothing in his hand. He came forth his mother's womb and so forth naked. This also is grievous. Then what profit hath he that laboreth for the wind? His days are in the darkness, and he's vexed in sickness and wrath. He said that won't give you happiness, abundance of treasure, but it's the man who hoards it. But you use what God has given you in a godly way, joy, and that's the one who prospers, and the one who eats the fruit of his labors. You use that to enjoy this life that's going to pass by, but you do it in a godly way. Yes, sir.
I think verse 18 of Ecclesiastes 5 is good because, yes, we all like to think we work hard, but I think there would be a mistake as verse 18 points out. Just never try to enjoy some of the fruits of the
Yeah.
labor that a godly way. And, instead of deferring happiness, when you miss that, this or that happens in the future, then I'll be happy. No, you should try to have some fun within God's will in the present.
I think you got it.
Don't defer happiness for some future event that may or may not happen.
That's right. We'll proceed that way. Okay, thank you very much.